One thing that Yu-Gi-Oh does, that most card game doesn't, is keeping all the cards that were printed from the beginning legal to play. In a lot of other card games, they do a set rotation, meaning that the previous set is rotated out of the format, and you have to use the new cards that were printed for the format. Yu-Gi-Oh does not do that. Instead, they have power creep. Well, that's for another video. But every card that is not on the ban list is fair play. I personally like that every card printed can be played because it means at some point a card might be useful to the current meta. For example, in the OCG, which is the format from Japan, a player used a card from 2002 to counter the card Kashtira Fenrir. Fenrir special summons itself if you do not control a monster. So what card from 20 years ago did the player use? It was none other than this card, Mushroom Man number 2. This card allows itself to switch control to your opponent during the end phase. This meant that their opponent could not use the effect of Fenrir to special summon itself. To me, this is one of the reasons that makes this game very fun to play, because you can find out some weird strategies that can combo off with cards from like 20 years ago. Unfortunately, it also comes with some downside. Obviously, since the only way to keep the game balanced is the ban list, sometimes some cards just naturally become overpowered since they weren't designed with the direction the game went. There are also some cards that just seem to be forgotten by Konami, that just became a problem afterwards. A lot of cards in the early stages of the game weren't meant to be super powerful or anything, but after releasing so many cards and the direction the game went with, a lot of cards became broken and were obviously banned. Some good example of that is Painful Choice, Graceful Charity, or Card of Save Return. These cards all do something that would benefit almost every deck. Painful Choice sends 4 cards to the graveyard and searches 1 to add to your hand, which thins your deck and could get you 1 card you needed. Foolish Burial is a card at 1 in the Forbidden and Limited list because it sends 1 monster to the graveyard. So as you can imagine, sending 4 cards of your choice would just win you the game. Graceful Charity draws you 3 cards and discards 2 of them. Once again, it digs into your deck while also being able to set up your graveyard for future plays. Card of Save Return draws you a card every time a monster is special summoned from the graveyard. The fact that bringing back a monster from your graveyard already generates some amount of advantage for you is nothing compared to the fact that the effect is not once per turn and that you could theoretically play 3 of them to draw you 3 cards every time you special summon a monster. As you can imagine, cards like these can never come back to the game. During the time of the release, the game used to be a lot slower because a lot of monsters were not very powerful and special summoning was a lot uncommon back then. Cards that could special summon were very rare during the early days of the game, but as everyone knows, Yu-Gi-Oh's trademark became the ability to special summon as many monsters as you can as long as your cards enable you to do so. Furthermore, the graveyard became an important aspect of the game because a lot of cards allow you to use the cards in the graveyard for your combos. With the evolution of the game, simple effects that could maybe generate you a +1 in card advantage, or even just break even, became some of the most powerful cards in the game, and most of them are banned for that reason. These cards also have this in common: they're not a hard once per turn, which means that if you have multiple copies of it, you can use all of them, which as we've previously seen, just one of them would create a huge amount of advantage. Since the game used to be pretty slow, no one could have guessed that this could have been a problem 20 years into the future. Nowadays, if a generic card can give you a +1 advantage, it is pretty much guaranteed to have a spot on the Forbidden and Limited list. On the other hand, there are cards that were never seen as viable until years later, which, as I've mentioned earlier, is one of my favorite aspects of the game. Anyway, these kinds of cards are often overlooked when they are released, until Konami releases new cards that can enable the broken potential the card has. Good examples of that would be the Tyrant Neptune, Smoke Grenade of the Thief, and Samsara Lotus. Tyrant Neptune has the ability to copy the effects of a monster that was used as a tribute, and he gains the attack and defense for all the monsters you've tributed for. You could choose the number of monsters for the tribute. Like I've said before, this card wasn't really used until they released Lyrilusk Independent Nightingale. This card, when used as a tribute, gave Tyrant Neptune 6000 attack, the ability to burn your opponent for 6000 life points, and the cherry on top was that it was unaffected by other card effects. You can kinda see why the card was banned. Now, Smoke Grenade of the Thief is a very old card released in 2003 in the booster pack Legacy of Darkness, and wasn't really used until a combo was found in 2020 with the Infernoble deck, which could abuse this card and rip cards from your opponent's hand. I said Infernoble deck, but it seemed to be more of a format thing. But once again, this very old card that no one used until now was abused and was banned quickly as they could. For my final example, Samsara Lotus became the object of an FTK with Topologic Boomer Dragon and some Link monsters. Since Samsara Lotus can revive itself at the end phase while being a non-once per turn, it can create an infinite burn loop that will win you the game if you pull off the combo. To be honest, there are a lot of variants to this combo unstable because it seems that it can create a lot of different infinite burn loops, which is probably why it got hit with the ban hammer. With every new set and every new card that Konami releases, a lot of old or forgotten cards could always have some potential to be broken if the right conditions are met. Now, if you've noticed something, a lot of the broken cards always seem to have this in common too. They all like a form of restriction on their effect, such as a lack of a once per turn or a hard once per turn. This is what often leads to broken cards or infinite loops. Alright, that's the video. If you feel like I've forgotten to mention something, feel free to comment it down below.